Francis.
Howdy, howdy. Did you seriously grow this in like 3 days?
Yeah. No. I had a mask on when we met the other day. Well, do you want to start with a beverage and then we have something to sip on while we're talking?
Well, I have what appears to be the lovely Imperial 11-degree Rosé from Eden.
I was going to suggest we start with the Brut Nature. That work for you?
So, no, it's a great package. Looks like a decent champagne bottle. Packaging's sharp.
Yeah. And then I think the plan was to try to pair that with either the Ransom Riesling or the Emmolo. Am I saying that right?
Emmolo.
Emmolo.
I don't know. This is new to me.
This is new to me.
What if I give this a taste real quick and then I try to tell you the Ransom or the Emmolo? How about you tell me about this particular one?
So this particular cider is their flagship cider. It's fermented completely dry. It is made in the traditional champagne method, hand disgorged.
Explain to me how champagne method works when it relates to cider.
It's the exact same process as wine, and it's the same riddling process of laying the bottle on its side, riddling it till it's upside down, and gathering all that sediment in the neck. And then, like I said, they hand disgorge every bottle, just like you would see in champagne. So this is all naturally. I mean, there's no filtration or anything. It's just gravity filtered, if you will.
Based on the aroma alone, I probably think the Ransom Riesling.
We'll start with the Riesling.
Obviously very well made. I like the oxidative notes right off the top, but I sort of expect that with the cider. But I'm pleasantly surprised by how bone dry it is. It's incredibly well balanced. It's a very well made glass of.
Well, Eleanor will be happy to hear that. Let me
give her 2 thumbs up.
Ooh. It's hard going back and forth.
After I tasted it, I think you might benefit from tasting the Emmolo Sauvignon Blanc because it's a little more primary and malicky.
Okay.
What I picked up off the nose of this smelled sweeter than the palate went on. But do me a small justice, if you would. Pour a little liquid off the dump your Ransom glass. If you've got a dump bucket, dump the Ransom glass, and then pour an equal amount of the Emmolo off. Put caps back on, give them both a really vigorous shake. Create a little headspace and force a little oxygen in. Because there's ambient CO2 in those. What happens is that the wine kind of wakes up. You get that sort of weirdo ambient CO2 out. But you'll just notice all of a sudden it's much more primary, much fresher. And I suggest, I've been doing this for like 25 years, shaking them. The only time I don't shake a wine is when it's a really old bottle of something that's precious. Other than that, everything's fair game. I mean, it's tough stuff.
A lot of head and foam built up, but I mean, I'd expect that if there's a little bit of CO2 dissolved in there.
Aroma-wise, I guess on the Ransom, but palate-wise, I think you might find a more companionable pairing with the Emmolo. The new bottling is just having great.
One of the places that these are going to differ the most is just in what they're made of, not just grape versus apple. I mean, the Riesling and the Sauvignon Blanc are individual single varietal grapes, whereas the Eden is 16 different varieties of apple that go into this. Part of the art of cider making is in the blending. Whether you blend the juice first and then ferment it, or some cider makers will blend each variety of apple and then take the finished product of that and blend that into the product that they want to have. There are single varietal ciders.
No, it's not that far removed from wine, just because there are such things as co-fermentation, where you're fermenting different grape varieties together. Co-routine, for instance, you've got Syrah and Viognier that are co-fermented together because the anthocyanins are these weird albino formations in Viognier, but as a result, when you mash them up with Syrah, they actually make the Syrah darker, but more aromatic and lighter on the palate. So blending isn't anything that's unusual in wine biz by.
Oh no, I mean it's not unusual, but I know that it's reasonably common. I just think that normally when you look at a wine, they're all named. They're frequently, most of them are named just by their variety. One of the things that you mentioned when we were talking the other day was, and through emails and texts and whatnot, is you're just not that familiar with cider, really.
Oh no, not at all. This is an education for me. I appreciate the generosity and the effort.
Please, this is going both ways. I mean, I'm guessing you've had a cider or two before.
Sure. I just never gave them the level of intellectual scrutiny or curiosity that they apparently deserve.
Where are these both from?
Well, the Emmolo is from Napa Valley.
Okay.
His daughter, Chuck Wagner, who makes Cambus Vineyards Cabernet Wagner family wine portfolio. And it's unusual to get something that high tone, that bright, acidic, and crunchy out of Napa Valley, because most people feel Napa Valley is a little too warm for Sauvignon Blanc. And I would agree, but she's very careful on her vineyard selections, and so she finds cool microclimates within Napa. And then she's got some interesting tricks she does with the plants themselves, reducing canopy, accelerating ripening, pushing pruning till later in the season, getting longer hang time. But you'll notice the alcohol is very low. But she actually deliberately goes through and brushes the bunches to reduce the number of blossoms per bunch, which allows for great airflow and whatnot. But it's, I've watched this wine evolve since they introduced the brand. And this is probably my favorite finish she's ever made. I think it's really exceptional. And before this, it was a little lean, a little green, a little stemmy, in my opinion. But this particular one, she really, squared it up and didn't fall out of the park, in my opinion. Ransom, on the other hand, is a rather soft spot of mine. I stumbled across him by accident after tasting through a couple hundred Rieslings one afternoon at a trade show in New York. And one of my favorite wine shops, Brooklyn, recommended that particular wine, and I read the label, and you know how you read a label and it says things like biodynamic and own-footed, checks all your boxes, and I hung out with a bottle of that Riesling for 5 days in New York in my hotel room, and I wasn't particularly nice to it. I left the cap off, I left it in the shower one day, rolled in the bed another day. I did all the things that you would expect to turn a wine sour very quickly. Turns out it's some of the oldest Riesling in Oregon. Hillside, biodynamically farmed. And as I said to the winemaker, I said, I've been drinking a lot of Ransom gin lately. And I said, you might want to sue that guy because they're using your name. He said, no, I make that too. It turns out I stumbled across not only a fellow upstate New Yorker, but the guy who was making gin and awesome Riesling. And so, the rest is history, I guess. But yeah, I like
their gin. I really love their vermouths.
Oh, don't get me started. I mean, he grows his own wormwood to put in those things. Tell me more about Eden. Where did they come from? Who are they?
So Eden is northern Vermont, Newport specifically, Vermont, which is their orchard is like 5 miles from Canada. So they're way, way, way up north.
Yeah.
They're a biodynamic orchard. And then they work with several other local orchards that are like-minded, depending on what they need for juice and what other producers have different juices and different apples available.
So they have a certain amount of acreage, but they contract fruit out from other folks.
Yeah.
Okay.
As far as the apple varieties that are in it, so apples. The simple way to divide apples is just culinary and dessert, and then all the other apples. So there's like 7,000 known varieties of apple.
That's more than grapes.
I know.
It's more than grapes, but if you want to take into account clonal variations, I think grapes might have you by a nose.
Probably. Well, there's that's 7,000 known. Well, which is same for grapes, but I don't know how I don't know grapes really well. If I take a Concord grape seed and plant it, will it grow Concord grapes?
Concord grapes are a Vitis vinifera variety, if I recall correctly, or Vitis sylvestris. they're basically a Native American wild grape variety. So what happens?
Oh, are they?
Yeah, generally speaking, you'll have rootstock first, or people that are planting rootstocks, or using grapevines to create rootstocks because phylloxera is a thing. I don't know what sort of pests plague apple trees, but I suspect they've got their own enemies out there in the wild. But for the most part, during the last century, most of Western Europe had to replant it because they had a root mouse that's like to eat the vines. But it used to be you took a cutting off your neighbor's vineyard, you stuck it in the dirt, it took out root, but that's what we call unfruit or French rose vines. But these were extremely susceptible to pests.
Yeah.
So it started, they had to replant most of Western Europe with California rootstock because it was phylloxera resistant for whatever reason. And so, fast forward to the 50s, 60s, UC Davis, they had to fix, and actually late 70s, early 80s, California got wiped out. So they had to start coming up with different rootstocks that were resistant to a little basket of the roots. So, that said, genetic variations take place because depending on your relative aspect of the sun and the equator and so on and so forth,
okay,
genetic variations in different plants. So if I go to Von Romanet and I get a little cutting from Von Romanet and I take it over here and I plant it in different dirt environmental conditions, the gene of the vine will mutate. And so grapevines tend to have a natural tendency to mutate to adapt to the environment. So you get a more mutation. So you can plant exactly the same rootstock, put it, Oregon and France, they're on the same parallel, and get vastly different results.
Okay.
Taking into account the olive is the same. So it's like peeling an onion. I could go on for a few hours, but that's the 50,000 foot view.
Oh, I could do the same. I mean, I can do the same with apples. I mean, with apples. So I mean, it's really interesting to hear that that's how grapevines mutate. With apples, pretty much any apple seed you plant is going to be a unique genetic new variety. They don't grow true to seed. So if you take, I'll just look off. I mean, on the back of this, you'll find Kingston Black. If you take some seeds out of a Kingston Black apple and plant them, Kingston Black is not what will grow. So the only way to propagate apples is to, cut off a piece of a branch called scion wood and graft it onto your rootstock and grow from there. So between the Ransom and the Eden, there's a real similarity on the nose.
Yeah, that's what I suspected. The smell on the Ransom always reminds me of Macintosh apples. It's got that sort of kind of sweet aspect to it.
That said, with the Emmolo, the nose is completely different.
Oh God, yeah. They're both fairly similar in alcohol. They're within a point of each other, but that sharp sort of malicky character in the Sauvignon Blanc definitely dominates on the palate. Describe the aromatics on the Eden for you, because I have this sort of almost, and I hate to use the word because in wine world, cidery is kind of a flaw, but I realize in cider world, cidery is actually a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has this sort of almost VA quality to it, kind of like you might smell off a kombucha for some strange reason, if that sounds weird.
No, I can kind of, in cider, it can happen accidentally and some people don't like it, but there's sort of a desired attribute that just, it's just kind of funky. It's old barn. Which I get a little bit of that in this, kind of an old barn.
It reminds me a lot of, I've been to what's called the Raw Wine Festival a few times. It's a big natural wine fair that I went to just because the whole notion of natural wine kind of surprised me, and I didn't quite know what to make of it because I had a certain understanding about farming and procedure and practice. It turns out it wasn't anything I didn't know already, which was really good farming makes really good wine. And I suspect the same is true with cider. If you're farming well and you're fermenting clean and you're not being an idiot in the cellar, you're going to make a good product. I like the Brut quite a bit. It's got a sort of a gentle persistence on the palate I quite like. And as it, goes from very cold to cool, it's got some really interesting aromatic layers that I really, really like.
Yeah.
Nice bottle of juice. How should we proceed with these particular bottles?
I like to finish with the Rosé personally.
Okay, we will finish with the Rosé then.
I'm just gonna. That Ransom is good. So
And Ransom's fucking great. I love that wine. Got a real soft spot for it. It competes with any German Riesling that's 2 or 3 times the price easily. It's crazy how good that wine is.
oh my god, that is really really good. Let's move on to the Cinderella and the was it Donkey and Goat, which I love the name of the winery. That's fantastic.
They're such good people. He's actually a Salt Lake native, the winemaker Jared Brandt. He and his wife met in California. They're both software dorks,
Okay.
and they apprenticed in a very fancy place in France and learned about donkeys that usually help with the harvest in the Rhone River Valley, so southeastern France. And apparently, the donkeys, when they're overworked, get a little agitated, and they give them goats for company. And the goats mellow out the donkeys. And so they decided to call their winery Donkey and Goat. This one smells considerably spicier. It smells more like apple pie.
Oh.
A lot of really nice baking spices. How does this one differ from this one?
So the Cinderella Slipper is a completely wild ferment. So there's no yeast pitched in that. And
It's much more tannic.
Yeah, there's a lot of tannins in there.
It's much grippier. Why is that?
The apples that are used, this one did 6 months in stainless and then 18 months in the bottle.
It's a fascinating cider, and the personality is much different than the first one.
So this one definitely has more of that funky barnyard kind of aroma that I was talking about. There's just there's elements of that. And for me, and a lot of other people, I mean, that's just sort of part of the cider world. For me, the funkier, the more barnyardy, the better. And it's sort of, I mean, you see it in farm. I mean, it's kind of a farmhouse cider, farmhouse beer.
No, I definitely get that sort of almost cheesy quality to it. It's an interesting beverage for sure. It's definitely got some extra funk layered on. But you know what it reminds me of is really good white Burgundy, where there's those leesy notes and that sort of funky yeasty smell.
Okay.
You get from really good French Chardonnay. It's got a little bottle age.
The Donkey and Goat definitely has a wild element to the aroma that I can smell. It doesn't smell, what's the word I want to, what's coming to my mind is it doesn't smell as, I'll say refined, as curated as a pitched yeast. I mean, you said this was a wild ferment, correct? Or a native ferment?
That's a native yeasty beastie.
So that's, yeah, I mean, it just smells a little bit more wild. Perfect combination between the two. There's definitely a wild nature to both of them. This one, like I said, I get much more barnyardy wild, which is common in ciders. This one, it's more of a...
The Cinderella Slipper smells almost like it started to go through malolactic, or it has that vaguely cheesy quality to it that I really kind of like. You know, that I usually associate with more expensive white Burgundy. And then the Donkey and Goat was just racked clean, and that was it. There was no filtering or refining going on there, so they let it sit, ran into another tank, let it put some more.
How long did the Donkey and Goat sit on the lees?
That's actually a pretty quick wine. I can't imagine more than for each cycling on the rack, 30 days at a time, three different tanks to get it clean. That was about it. And no lees stirring, so it doesn't have that sort of oxidative quality that you get when you beat the piss out of the lees. Because usually if you stir the lees a lot, you have these prematurely oxidative characters that affect the wine and make it seem like spoiled fruit. You're familiar with orange wine?
No.
It's kind of a fairly distinct subcategory where they allow the skins of white wine to sit with the juice, and as a result, you get colored white wines that have this sort of coppery orangey color to them. So Pinot the Pinot Noir family, for instance, there's a mutant cousin of Pinot Noir that you know is Pinot Gris. And so as it presents in the vine, the grapes have this kind of bluish gray color. They don't look like Pinot Noir, but they don't look like you would expect a white wine grape to look. And so when you smash them up, you can get Pinot Grigio, and it'll be very clear and very nice. But occasionally you see what happens when people leave the skins in the tank for a bit, and the wine develops a coppery color that the Italians call ramato or ramato, depending on who you talk to. But anyway,
Sure.
You get this sort of coppery colored white wine that looks, depending on who made it, kind of like rosé. Essentially what it is a tannic white wine. And can you go over the top and do the wrong thing with it? Yeah, of course. You can make these horribly tannic white wines that don't taste like white wine anymore, but you can make these ones that have these sort of hints that remind me a lot of the astringency and the textural notes on the palate on a couple of these ciders. Interesting stuff. That's what these are reminding me of. That's why I pulled out the Donkey and Goat, because that's as close as, Donkey and Goat, they're sort of the godfathers of natural wine in the US, to be perfectly honest with you. They're the ones who really sort of made it modern and acceptable and sort of led the way. People have been making wines like this in garages all over Sonoma County for years, but not guiding them carefully and responsibly and using things like minimal effective sulfurate bottling to make sure it was at least moderately sound before you send it off into the world. Because there's a lot of natural wine out there that is just hot freaking garbage, but there's some out there that make you go, oh, okay, now I get it. But yeah, there's that vaguely tannic feel in the mouth you get from the little bit of skin contact. It reminds me a lot of cider, to be honest with you. That's a pretty complex glass of wine. I will tell you that. That one's definitely got a lot of perfume building up in the back side of the palate. I'm really enjoying it. Yeah, check out. I'm be curious to see how the rosé works with the Cinderella slipper. Where I think this might be very similar to the Cinderella slipper is that it has that sort of extra bit of tannin and grippiness to it that you usually don't expect out of a rosé. As far as the glycerol effect goes, I think this might be a little fat for that, but the tannic structure in the mouth is going to be pretty similar. I'm just guessing at this point.
And where's this one? Is this
It's from Puglia. Heel of the boot.
So we're looking for tannins? Is that what we're trying to compare?
Yeah, sort of back of the palate, that sort of astringency, grittiness.
Yeah, I get it.
It's a neat wine.
It is. It's very good.
I noticed cider and red currants. So are they co-fermenting things?
Yep. That one is.
Hence the color.
The rose. That's where the color comes from in that particular rosé.
Yeah.
It's 90% apples, 10% red currant.
Oh, that's a pretty smell. Oh shit, that's delicious. Is that technically bone dry, or is that a little off dry?
Little off dry. So, with this particular cider, Eden got their start with ice ciders, is really where kind of everything started for them. Which is
cider.
Ice cider, very much the same as ice wine.
Okay.
And I'm not sure I'm not sure the particulars with ice wine, but with ice cider, you can either let the apples freeze and press the frozen apples, or you press the apples, get the juice, and then you set it outside and let the water naturally freeze off, and you take what's left, which is ultimately apple concentrate or juice concentrate, which is what they do in this. That's how they get it up to 11%.
It's definitely it's definitely a little bit of a heftier beverage than the previous two.
Yeah. Which is kind of why I like to end on that one. I really poured myself a healthy pour on this one.
Well. Yeah,
so this one's 11%. The other two that we've had, the Brut Nature is 8%. The Cinderella Slipper is 7.5.
Are there such things as when you talk about grape concentrate, do they have those more thick syrupy styles or dessert wine type things?
Yeah. Oh, when you get into an ice cider, it's much more syrupy and you know, thicker, more along the lines of like port. Much more dessert like, a lot of sugar there, very, very, very rich.
Any sort of effervescence to them?
No, they're completely still.
Oh, nice. Interesting stuff. How many varieties of apples go into this one?
This one I don't know offhand. I'm not sure if it's 100% consistent year to year, of whether it's, you know, I mean, with the Brut and this, well, Cinderella Slipper was a one-off kind of thing. It will come back around again in 2 or 3 more years, probably. But who knows if it, I mean, it, you know, when it comes back around, it's not going to be the same as this wild ferment versus, you know, and also what apples went into it. Whereas Brut Nature is pretty consistent with the apples that go into it. I don't know that this one is consistent on the apples 100%. There's probably some variation year to year.
I can see where Caputos would have a lot of fun pairing these with cheeses.
Rosé particular. So I don't know if you saw, we did a cider class with Caputos the other day.
Yeah.
Rosé was one of the ciders that they had ordered in for that.
Oh, nice.
I don't remember exactly what they paired it with.
If I were to take a wild guess, I suggest it's probably the Olympia Provisions Rillettes or something along those lines, because they've got a few over there that are just dynamite. I can see. I mean,
that sounds right.
You know, this is, you know, straight out of Normandy cuisine, Rillettes, Dijon mustard. What the hell else was I thinking of? Camembert. You know, really good old school Camembert that gets a little stinky and, you know, has almost apple cider overtones to it. That's got a really beautiful mouthfeel. That's really nice cider.
This is their best seller. This one just goes gangbusters for them.
Oh, I can see why. I mean, these are really well made, very sound ciders, but I can see where they might need a little more explanation. But this one has a really distinct character. I suspect it's the elevated alcohol and that bit of residual sugar that gives it the most curb appeal. Well, I got to tell you, that's quite the delicious lineup. I appreciate the insights.
This is one of the things that I personally love about working in cider. I'll say in cider in general, but especially with working with producers who are the artisans that I do work with. I love introducing people to ciders like this, especially people like you coming into something like this where, you know, you didn't really have any experience with it. I'm sure cider had, you don't have to say anything, but I mean, I'm sure cider had a semi-negative connotation in your mind a little bit, and that's common with the American consumer.
It didn't have a negative connotation just because of, you know, where I came from, where I grew up. I mean, I'd encountered ciders here and there. It was just never it was never a beverage that pulled me in that general direction. I mean, I knew there were artisanal ones out there, and I knew there were various ones around France and Spain where cider culture is ginormous, and Germans love the stuff as well. I know there was a whole layer of complexity to it, but, you know, I can only fit so many jars of baby food on the shelf. When it comes to trying to remember alcohol details, and, you know, I'm relatively new to spirits, and so I've been sticking with wine and spirits. I mean, it was never my beverage of choice, to be honest with you, but I can see myself happily, you know, drinking any of these three all day long, because one, you know, the reason I don't drink beer is because I try very hard to avoid unnecessary carbohydrate intake, and beer is loaded with them. These don't taste like they're very much different than wine when it comes to chemical breakdown versus water, sugar, alcohol, tannin, acid, blah, 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 all that nonsense. You know, these don't seem like they're carb heavy like beers are, because usually when I drink beer, I feel like I swallowed a bowling ball. But these all, even the rosé on the end, feel bone dry or pretty damn close to it.
These are all very dry.
Yeah. I'm not going to, you know, conk out and go into a coma nap after I finish the glass of each I've had, you know, throughout the course of the evening. No, these are terrific. They're extraordinarily well made. I got no problem with these at all. And this one even has what the wine nerds call vinous characteristics.
Okay.
a degree of vinosity.
If I had to pick one out of my portfolio to present to a wine drinker, it's going to be this one.
Yeah, you just took the words out of my mouth. That's your gateway drug right there.
For wine drinkers, absolutely. I think this is one that, and for the real sophisticated drinker and the real educated people, like I feel like they'd know just smelling it that no, this is not a rosé wine. But I think for the average consumer, you could probably pass this off as a rosé wine, and they may not be any the wiser. I really appreciate you doing this.
No, not a problem. Happy to do it. I'm glad to get to know you. Steve speaks highly of you. Any friend of his is a friend of mine, and you're bringing good shit to the marketplace. And I'll continue doing what I've been doing, which is I don't know fuck all about cider. Talk to this guy.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Clearly, you've got a great cider palate, to say the least.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate the ciders. Let's do it again.
Appreciate the wines. Thank you.
Well, let's make a repeat. All right.
Absolutely. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. By now you know the drill. If you liked it, hit the like button, and if you want to see more of our videos, be sure to subscribe. As always, please drink responsibly, and until the next cider, cheers.